the young people, you don't really have a successful mission because you can't. That's who you're reaching. So, having said all of that, we're in the studio with Pastor John Love, head of our youth department here. Also, been doing it for almost 40 years now, I think.
Getting close.
I'm getting close. Good God! And we're by Zoom. We have Pastor Paul and Kimmy Angelonis who work in the youth department here, and we also have Pastor Gary Angelonis.
Gary Androlonis?
Pastor Gary Grinwald.
I didn't know if he was your new adopted child.
Well, Kimmy wants an older kid, and this is what he is.
Well, okay.
So let's call Convention Hangover. Please forgive me on that one. One too many ice cream sundaes, I think. Anyway, welcome to Missions Monday. We'll begin with a devotional by Pastor Love, and then we'll invite the Angelonises and Pastor Gary to get involved. Pastor Love.
Okay, thanks, Pastor Ronaldo. And of course, I think that this is a great subject and a great theme because, somebody once said that whoever wins this generation wins the future. And we know that the devil is very active in trying to blind the minds of young people today, more so than ever before. And he has been referred to as Sabbathless Satan. Yeah, takes no days off, so he's always at it. And that makes what we do all the more important and all the more necessary and imperative to reach young people as early an age as possible. I mean, I came to know Christ at the age of 17, and I oftentimes wish that it was 7 years old, because from 7 to 17, those are 10 more years that I could have been able to learn about the character and the nature of God, learn to walk by faith, learned more of the Scripture. So I missed out on a whole decade. But having said that, I'm grateful that when I heard the gospel, I was at the point of despair to such a place that I responded to it when I heard it and embraced the gospel. And when those who were sharing the gospel with me led me to Christ, that was the best decision that I have ever made in my life.
Awesome.
So, having said that, I think when it comes to young people, one of the most important subjects that we can talk about is identity. They have to achieve some sense of identity. Either get on the road and just be going in that general direction to experience their identity, or having achieved it as young an age as possible. And the reason why I say that, because a good working definition for identity is a conscious sense of individual uniqueness. That's what an identity is. It's more than showing somebody your driver's license or your passport. Some people think, can you give me some identity? And God wants us to be very much conscious of who we are as an individual, as the unique individual that he has made us to be. And when you achieve that, then you're on the road to achieving some sense of purpose in your life. But without an identity, I mean, I can remember very clearly my mother and father as a junior in high school. They kept, somewhat pressuring me, saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do what about your future? I had an older sister that was, in nursing school, and I had another sister that she was on the road to becoming what, from the world's perspective, would be considered success. And I was getting all kinds of pressure, like, what are you going to do? Well, as I look back on those days, I realize how would it have been even possible for me to talk about what I wanted to do when I didn't even know who I was?
Wow.
So first and foremost, young people have to begin to understand who they are. And again, they can get that identity from their peers, which is not a healthy way to get it. You can get it from maybe the success that you experience in life or the failure. I mean, the devil is more than happy to, help young people achieve some sense of identity from his perspective. But God says, I want them to know who they are in me. I mean, I've always been fascinated when Moses met God at the burning bush in the desert in Exodus chapter 3, and the Lord, was speaking to him, calling him, commissioning him to become this, he would be the liberator of the children of Israel from their bondage in Egypt. And of course, Moses said, well, Lord, who am I? And God's response was not, oh, well, you're Moses. You were spared as a child. You were brought up in Pharaoh's home. You were rescued by Pharaoh's daughter out of that river. And I have preserved you. No, God never answered Moses' question by telling Moses who he was. He answered Moses' question by revealing to Moses who he was. The answer to that question, who am I, came from God in this form. I am that I am. Which is to say that our identity is so closely linked to that of who God is that you're not going to experience it unless you have that relationship with Christ. And when you begin, even if it's just moving in that general direction, you begin to understand, you start to develop that personal sense, that conscious sense of individual uniqueness. You're going to begin to tackle some things in life that otherwise you might just stay clear of. You're going to begin to move in a direction that's going to lead you into your purpose. And it's going to start with a sense of personal identity. It's going to lead you into your sense of purpose, and it's going to end up with a sense of destiny. You're going to be able to know where you're going. And isn't that great to be able to cross that last one off our list, a sense of a destiny? We know where we're going. Yeah. We know that when this life, this temporal existence comes to a conclusion, we're going in the presence of God. No question about it. I mean, we've already got a boarding pass given to us by Christ himself. We're not flying standby, thank God. We've got a boarding pass. You ever see the difference of people when they're at the airport? Yeah. The ones that have a boarding pass, they can sit down comfortably, have something to eat, have a cup of coffee, and then you look at the standby folks. You're a little bit nervous, a little bit concerned. Why? Not sure if they're going to make that flight, not sure if they're going to reach their destination. Yeah. You and I, just a perfect sense of peace. Why? I get that little boarding pass in my hand or on my phone these days. So that makes all the difference for us. So think about it. With a personal sense of identity, a sense of purpose in terms of what my ability, what my talent, what my gift is. And of course, 1 Corinthians 12:7 says everyone, without exception, including young people, have a gift, if not more than a gift, to reveal who Christ is to the body of Christ. So there's lots that we can say about this subject, but I think it all starts with that personal sense of identity. You get that, or you start to get that, things are going to begin to unfold. The veil is going to be removed. You're going to start to realize that, hey, I am more than just a child of God. I have a purpose in the body of Christ. I can participate in building God's kingdom. I don't have to be a spectator. I can be a participator. And it all just begins to unfold, and it all begins to become more and more clear. It's kind of like fog. When you wake up on some mornings and you get in your car, you got to go very slowly. But as the sun comes out, it begins to burn off that fog. What do? You accelerate, you begin to see much more clearly, and you can begin to move ahead. Same thing will happen with a young person who begins to understand who they are in Christ.
Excellent. My identity. It's interesting when you watch young people move into a church. More often than not, at least a generation ago, not so much now, because sometimes a lot of people, young people, choose their own church. But at a certain point, you were led into the church by your family or a family member, grandmother, parents, and that church you were brought in at a very young age. And then you were kind of brought up generationally. And as you move through the different areas of the church generationally, you start making decisions about whether or not you want, about God and about church and about identity.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the Barna Group did a survey that most of the people that made that decision as a young person, once they got to college age, 1 out of 3 stayed, 2 out of 3 left. And of the people that left, a good majority, almost 80%, didn't leave for an intentional reason. They unintentionally just left. For many reasons, it was college. They didn't like a social position of the church. They had a relational conflict. There wasn't a plan to leave when college came. Unintentionally, they just ended up outside of the church. So then as a young adult, There was no church in their life. And some of them discovered God later, but many of them did not. But it's interesting what you said when you talked about how people come in and how they're brought up. And I guess it's a two-pronged thing. I want to bring the Angelonis in on this. There's a two-pronged thing. There's the children that come up in your church. That's one group of people. How do we reach them? How do we keep them? Then there's another group of young people that are outside your church that you're trying to draw into your church to get them in that process. So when you're running a mission of a church and you've got a vision to reach the young people, you've got a double-pronged attack. I'm trying to raise the ones we have and win the ones we don't. So I know both of you two are heavily involved in youth ministry here in Baltimore. How do you see that juxtaposition between reaching the outside and at the same time raising what's on the inside?
So I like that, the way that you put it, we're raising the ones that are here as part of our church and then looking to outside to those, which is what basically this summer is going to be. We had June Alive last year and now this year. I'll talk about raising the ones that are here because, that's my experience of how I grew up. I was born into the church and grew up in the church. And for me, that's one of the reasons why I got involved with the youth ministry is because I saw myself in a lot of the young people that are in our church. You grow up in the church, people, you get to know people through your entire life, and you're receiving and hearing the same things maybe over and over again. You hear words like grace and redemption and faith and sin and all these different words over and over again. And in some ways you can become desensitized to those. So in our ministry, or the way that I try to talk and help with these young people, is to kind of make it real to them, these things that they're hearing, like to help them understand and grow in their faith and understand it for themselves. Because like I said, when you're hearing, you go to Sunday school every day. We talked about it with the junior teens this past week. Like, why do I go to church? Maybe I go to church because that's where all my friends are. Or maybe I go to church because my parents make me go to church. But if I'm going to church because I know who God is and I know his goodness and his love for me, and that's what I'm receiving and I'm seeing when I go there, then I'm more likely to continue to go there when my friends aren't there, or when there's not bubble soccer or a slip and slide or something like that going on at church. When we move from that transition to being part of the big church, it's more of an easy transition because it's something that's more than just what's happening that night, but it's something that I feel in my heart because of what Jesus has done.
I think we connect. I like the word you use there for transitions, because that's where you often lose kids on the inside group. You lose kids on the transitions. They get it. They're in nursery. They go to Sunday school. They go from Sunday school. They go to youth ministry. They go to youth ministry, and then somehow you kind of hope Bible school's going to hold them a little bit, but it's a good gang that's not going to go to Bible school. So one young person said to me in South Africa, if I don't go to Bible school, is there a place for me in this church? And he was like, me and my wife, we're 21, 22, we're young, but I don't think Bible school's for us right now. Is there a place for us in this church? And before I got defensive, I said, that's a great question, and that's an honest question. I would like to say yes, but I can't roll off 15 things that you can do to say, of course, this, and this, and this, because it wasn't there. Which leads me, Pastor Love, to my question. How do you build them through the transitions?
Well, the question that they asked is such a good question, because I think a lot of the young people even ask that question here. If I'm not going to go to Bible college, if I'm not going to, as a young man, study to be a pastor, if I'm not going to go in the mission field, is there a place for me? I mean, I was shocked once when I got in an automobile with one of the brothers here several years ago. He was taking us down to a baseball game in Washington, and he also had another young man that he had invited. And, I get in the back seat, we were introduced, and I just started a conversation. He was a believer. I don't know where he went to church, but we started to talk about our ministry. I said, are you familiar with our ministry? He says, yeah. He says, I haven't gone to church there because I heard that if you're not going to be a pastor or a missionary, you just don't have a place.
Wow.
And I was like
Wow.
shocked when I heard that. And I was like, oh, no, you have a place. And I think that that's something that we need to communicate to our young people. Would we ideally like to see all of them go to Bible college, get that as a foundation in their lives? Yes, of course. Ideally, if you're going to go to a secular college or university, at the same time, take a Bible college course or two, great. But is there a place for Christian dentists, doctors, lawyers, hospital administrators? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because here's the thing, you go back to the point that you just made, and Pastor Paul, he just mentioned it as well, and that is the coattail effect that works in politics, for instance, does not work in the church. In other words, politically, if you have a popular president, let's say, and that president, wins by a landslide in the general election for president. Well, if he's a Republican, for instance, let's use Ronald Reagan as an illustration. Well, all the Republicans, when Ronald Reagan was swept into the White House by a huge majority, all the Republicans on a state level, on a, even a city level, well, they were swept into their offices as well because they went in on the coattails of Ronald Reagan. That doesn't work in the church.
Wow.
That does not work. And I illustrate that with the woman at the well. I mean, apparently everybody in that town knew what that woman was like. They knew about her previous 5 disasters, marriages, and the man she was living with was not her husband. They knew that. But when she met Christ and they had that conversation and she went into the town and said, you got to come and see this man who told me everything about my life. And they all came out, the multitude, the town came out to see Jesus. Well, after they heard Jesus, you know what they said? They said, now we believe, not because you told us, because we have heard him for ourselves. That's the key. A young person has to hear God personally. It's not enough that their parents believe. It's not enough that they came from a Christian home. They have got to personalize it, internalize it, and they've got to believe God for themselves. And how are they going to believe God for themselves unless they personally hear him?
Let's stay inside for a second. We're still talking about the ones that are in the house, because I really believe you can't care for those outside the house unless you've got a plan, a strategy, a capacity for the ones that are inside the house. You got to build from the outside in. You can't be, we're going to reach those kids out there, meanwhile our kids are walking away. You got to be inside out. So staying inside, Pastor Gary, what are some ways, say I'm a missionary or a new church planner or even an experienced church, and what are some ways that I can help build in that personal, or let me say, how to put it this way, maybe create the atmosphere where the young person can meet God, like Pastor Paul said, to get past the bubble soccer and into a personal revelation of God, even at 10 years old, 8 years old, 12. What are some ways I can use to do that? And I'm going to ask the Angelosis for that a question same as well.
Okay. I remember just a thought of a 5-year-old kid in Germany. She was Thea Wollenberg, and having a vision for her life that she would someday go to Bible college. And it wasn't necessarily Bible college, but that she would walk with God, and also her brother, Henrik. And so I shared this the other day in the convention, but we carry this vision for people in their life. And it allows us to identify with them. We're not ministering from some high place, and it's going down on them. We get where they're at. When we go to where they are at when they are 5 years old. I can't wait as a pastor to go into, a kindergarten room, to be with the pre-K, and to be down at their level. This is we see kids at any level, and we want to be right where they are at. We don't want to be above them. We don't want to be below them. And we hazard this foolishness in our life. We have to become a fool In other words, put aside our spiritual dignity and like be with a child right where he is at and he feels at home. I think this is such a part of ministry. If they're a high school senior, I want to be right where they are at. It's almost like acting. It's like, you take on that role and you meet them where they're at, and you have different ears. They're not judgmental ears. They're not tugging cords of trying to pull them up somewhere where they have no idea. You are right where they are at. And I think this is like little Avery. It's Androlonis's daughter, their youngest daughter. Like, I was in nursery with her, and I mean, I feel like, our hearts got knit together one day in nursery. These nurseries should be an anointed time. The classrooms that are Greater Grace Christian Academy should be anointed times where there's this incredible identification with exactly where that kid is at. You can't say, I don't like 5-year-olds. It's like, I like to identify with people. I like to identify with an 80-year-old. So I think this is this is how we reach the kids, and we find out. I like a Bible college student. I want to identify right where they are at, and so it gives security to that individual that you are right with them. You are not above them or below them, and you know what? You establish a relationship with them at that level. So I think that carries them. It gives you an opportunity to minister to them. You're not catching them when they're 18 years old. You're ministering to them when they're 3 years old and they're in the pre-K nursery. So I think that's an aspect of ministering to a child, and you're carrying this vision for them. It's not necessarily Bible college. It's, I want that child to walk with God. I want to put a seed in that child's life that God will use, he will breathe upon. I don't know how God will connect it. Okay, maybe that's all I'll say for that, okay?
That's awesome. Okay. That's awesome, Pastor Gary. Just so far, if I'm a pastor listening, or I've got a youth pastor listening, and I want to try to reach the young people in my church, the ones that the parents have brought in, or maybe they've come on their own. Personal investment is key. As a leader, I want to make sure that I connect with them relationally. And if I have that relationship, when they move through the transitions that happen in a church, as they get older, they move from department to department. They're no longer in Sunday school. They're no longer in youth ministry. That's what's going to keep them, the relationship. Maybe, Kimmy, you could also chime in on this, because I know a lot of guys have tactics and strategies. Well, we're going to do this and have this and track them and have a form and a graph, and there's got to be a better way than that, Yeah,
so I like what Pastor Gary mentioned about, like, personal relationship, and it's something that Paul and I have talked about a lot. Like, we grew up in the church. We were in the youth ministry our whole lives, and now working with, like, when we first started working with the youth, our kids were very little, so it was very natural to, I'll jump in the nursery. So I was, with the nursery age kids. And then as they're getting older, we're kind of progressing with them a little bit, and now we're like a lot more involved with the teens. But personal relationship, again, goes for any age. And for a kid to know that, wow, that person knows my name, is a big deal. Like this week at convention, when every kid's walking in, we're like, hey, so-and-so, like, we're so glad you're here. And like, to know kids by name is a big deal. And they love that. And it's like, you can see it in their face, like, you know me. Like, and even if it's just a hello, it's a big deal for any age. I do it all the time at GGCA when I'm picking up my kids, and I'll walk down, past the high schoolers and just, hey you, so-and-so. And it's like, oh, they call me by name. Like, they know me. Like, It's kind of weird, but it's like, to see their face light up is amazing. And having, going back to the personal relationship thing, excuse me, starting, we talk about this, I think, a lot in the youth office, it's very easy for the, really bad kids to get noticed because their parents are coming to you. What are you gonna? Please help me with this situation with this kid. Like, the bad kids are always getting noticed because it's negative attention and they're there. And then very naturally, the kids that, are more in your face about wanting a relationship with God, and they're coming to you, like Pastor Love over the years, I know you have tons of experience with this. There's those kids that come to you, so what are the two groups of kids that are in your face? It's the ones that come to you and the ones that their parents are coming to you, or the ones you're always, they're always getting in trouble. So you're dealing with that. And then the ones that are coming to you. So like, what about all those other kids in the middle? They're not necessarily bad or whatever, but let's not label it. They're not the ones getting in trouble all the time. And they're not the ones that are like, I want to go on this trip. I want to go with you. I'm at every Bible study. There's like that whole middle area where you can really, I feel like that's a huge, and I feel like that's probably most of the kids. Like, there's a select few that are in one category, a select few that are in this other category, but then everybody else is in this middle category. And because they're not in your face for a negative or positive reason, like, they can get lost. And for me personally, I mean, we love all the children, all the youth, but I love intentionality, like going to them, sitting down and having that awkward conversation. Hi, how are you? Just getting it started, especially with teenagers. Oh,
beautiful word, intentional.
So fun. Yeah.
I think you mentioned the word about outing, creating events to stimulate this personal investment, because other than seeing them in church, you're not, hi, how are you? You're not going to get a lot of opportunities. I know you guys do a lot of visitation, for instance, Pastor Love. You guys do a lot of visitation. You also plan events, which gives them a chance to get out of the church environment and get with them one-on-one and get more quality investment. And speak a bit about that, because a lot of missionary churches, they don't do a whole lot of events, to be honest with you. They kind of go to events that are somewhere else, but in and of themselves, they don't really have, and to be honest with you, most missionary churches don't do youth visitation. It doesn't really exist there. I mean, you do adult visitation, but you don't really see youth. If you're in a foreign country and you're visiting a young person, in some cultures, that's perceived the wrong way. So, and they may be in your church. So an adult coming to visit, and I'm a youth worker coming to visit, it's not always received well. So having said that, maybe you could speak, I ask all three of you or four of you about that. How do you create that connection beyond just personal investment of high and buy through visitation, through outings, through events? How do you strategize that? How do you put that together? Pastor Gary, maybe you could have a thought on that first.
Okay, well, I don't necessarily organize events. I mean, I'm not talking to a mission. I'll talk about this church. It's a bigger church here in Baltimore, but I like to join the event, like to be a part of the event. If there's an event, to become a part of it. So that's I wanna help Coach, do his CYA, the summer camp basketball. Maybe I can jump in there. Those are, things like what have we organized? I remember in Germany, we made our camp. We did a camp life for kids, and we got the cottage, and we did the building together where you climb up trees and you have to make team life like that. We did all of that. We used to go apple picking with the kids. We used to go for bike rides. One of the greatest things as a missionary, you don't go to the parents' house like you just said. I'm going to see the kids. I'm going to go over to Fuad's and Angela's house, and I'm going to see their kids. I'm going to see Benjamin and Mikhail, and I'm going to play with their kids. And in the meantime, I'm ministering to the family. Just enjoy the kids. It's not like, they say, well, you want to come over and visit my house? Well, wait till the kids are in bed. No, go to the family's house
That's good.
and play with the kids while they're up. And that'll minister more to the family than having a tea and a dessert with them late at night. So you go and you play with the kids. I mean, those were things that I used to do. I wanted to be with the kids. So, okay,
Pastor
enough
Love.
said.
Well, I think the programs that you put together, the plans, all of the activities, they're so necessary. Young people got a lot of energy. I mean, they've got energy that's endless. So they need an outlet for all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm for any and all activities, providing that, of course, you don't leave out the one element that has the power to change their lives, and that's the Word of God. You have to find a way to creatively communicate the message to them in the midst of all of that activity. Otherwise, think about it. If it's just about the activities, how are we any different than the boys' club or the girls' club or any of these programs that the world offers kids to keep them safe, keep them out of trouble, keep them, busy during the summertime, right? Well, ours is different. We have this great overall objective. What is it? We want to reach them with the gospel, first and foremost. We want them to come to Christ to be saved. Then we want to begin to invest in them and make disciples. Can you do that in the midst of all of these activities? Absolutely. Absolutely. But you always have to have the overriding goal and objective. We're going to make disciples. We want to train these young people so that they see the older people. Because remember, here's the great principle to remember. Youth ministry. They're growing up. They're not growing down. They're growing up. So it's going to be, they're going to go from Sunday school, they're going to go from, the adolescents, junior teens, teen ministry, and then they're going to go into our local churches and hopefully be very involved and very much a part and very much participating in all that's going to happen. And again, that's all transitional.
Yes.
This is the other challenge. I remember the first group of young people back in the early 1980s that we ministered to. You had them for like 5, 6, 7 years. You watched them grow up. And then guess what happened? They had to go to church. They left.
Wow.
I was like, that was traumatic. And I had this tendency, this thought in my mind that, but they're my kids. They're my disciples. Great principle to remember. They're not ours. They're not our disciples. They're not our kids, unless, of course, they really are our kids, our children. But even then, we have to kind of release them, don't we?
Yes.
So you got to remember that. They're not going to be with you forever. This is, youth ministry work is transitional. But if we can help to build that bridge to get them from being a young person to being an adult and then actively engaged and involved in the local church, that's success.
I kind of touches back on what Pastor Gary was saying about planting a seed, and kind of what Kimmy and Pastor Angelonis were saying about relationship. In the relationship, sowing a seed that hopefully when they do transition, they do leave you, and then you see them later. And it must be interesting for you to see them later as adults.
Well, yeah, a great illustration. I had to do a wedding this weekend, and at the wedding were some young people that, many, many years ago were in the youth ministry. But they were sharing with someone that they came to the wedding with about camp life. You're talking almost 40 years ago that these kids were at Camp Life. And they were like, it was the best. This is a 50-something-year-old young woman saying this.
Wow.
It's the best time of my life. And she started to describe the overland overseas race. We're in the canoe, but they didn't give us oars, and we had to row the canoe across the river. And then there was this ropes, on and on. And I was just like, are you kidding me? She was recalling these vivid details because of the impact that program had in her life.
Seeds.
Yeah,
That's
it's
so
all
good.
about that investment. Does it pay off? Absolutely.
Wow. I like that. Relational seeds and I like what they said about early. Angelonis has said about getting it early. Names. I know your name. I know you. You matter. There's value. There's no sweeter word you like in the world than hearing your name. So one thing that spins your head is when you hear your name. So it's amazing that little small touches. Pastor Gary's talking about going over people's houses. I'm here to see the whole family. I'm not here to wait till the kids go. Put the kids out of the room, bring the kids back in the room. I like that connection. I think that's key.
Hearing your name means everything. Just like you said a little bit earlier, Gary Androlonis. I mean, to hear his name like that meant the world to
He
him.
almost had a car accident when he heard Gary Angelonis. I mean, he started shaking the steering wheel. I was stunned, actually.
My uncle.
I was thinking about Kimmy saying that's a big kid to feed. That's what I was thinking about. Some takeaway dinners for that. But let's switch gears a little bit here. We've been talking about our kids in our house, and we've got a great ministry for the kids in our house, and our mind has to drift beyond our house. If we're building up, because a lot of the events and things that we're doing, they have an opportunity to bring those outside on the inside and expose them and win them and start sowing seeds in new soil. So I know, Pastor Gary, this is an issue heavy on your heart about winning young people. A lot of churches, frankly, do not have an outreach program for young people. They have a Sunday school, maybe they have a youth ministry. And even on the mission field, a lot of mission fields, a lot of missionaries, you don't evangelize a lot of young people, and there isn't a tactic or a strategy to reach the young. And that's, like I said, 40% of the world is under the age of 24. It's a huge number. So what are some ideas, if I'm listening to the program right now, what are some ways and ideas and even motivations for reaching the young people in the world?
Well, first of all, a 5-year-old in 10 years is going to be 15 years old. That gives you, you're going to have a teenager in your church in 10 years if you invest in youth. But that's inside of your church. But first of all, go back to what Pastor Love said. The devil is out to destroy these children. He doesn't sleep. He wants to make Swiss cheese out of their minds. And he's using it with, obviously all the different inputs that they're getting. Okay, so we know that that's happening. We know that the definition of family life is extremely confusing, let alone even what sex they are. So but we have the gospel.
Amen.
And that is really what we are believing on. Now, when I said seeds, to give you an example, I was 8 years old and I was in a VBS Sunday school, and a pastor spoke about doctrine. We drew little line flow charts with doctrine. I remember that. I met a pastor in LA after I graduated from college. He had doctrine, and he taught doctrine. And later, I found Greater Grace World Outreach, a church that teaches doctrine. What we do, we plant seeds. It's like hope deferred makes the heart sick. People don't even know what they're hoping for. All their hopes dissolve. We put seeds in their life, and this desire comes to pass, and it becomes the tree of life. There's this awakening. There's this light. Moses's mother's, doctrine went into Moses's life, and it carried him through his life to give him this lively hope. It wasn't a hope that would dissolve. It was this lively hope. There was a burning bush that turned him. And those were seeds from his mother about his nation, about his race, about the living God. So that's what we're doing. Then there again, it's like, at what age? It's like we are planting the almighty, all the dunamis power, miraculous seeds into children's lives that God is going to breathe upon. And we have that type of mystical ministry, and we know that it's going to bear fruit. Okay, so that's an introductory thought for this group here.
Yeah, reaching young people and understanding that the gospel is for the young people too. And I think sometimes we think about, I'm going evangelizing and I'm looking for someone who's 21 years or older, or someone who's on my level, and I walk past young people. And how many times does people walk past young people You're not old enough. You can't think. You can't make decisions. You don't understand that. You need to be in Sunday school. You need the Sunday school, but you don't need the gospel. It's amazing how much we don't reach the lost that are young. We feel they're not mature enough to handle the decision. So we tend to look up instead of looking down. And I like the way, Pastor Gary, you've readjusted our eyes to down. I know that, Pastor Love, that you started a outreach on Friday night, soul winning, with young people, soul winning. Besides reaching young people, soul winning, getting young people to soul win, putting that in their seed in their heart. How many years has you been doing Friday night soul winning?
Over 30. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we were doing it when we were located in Lenox, Massachusetts, and we reached out to a lot of different cities and towns in proximity to where the Bible College and where the church was located, and then here in the Baltimore area, same, just reaching out and, because I think when a young person shares the gospel, it just helps to create more of an understanding of what the gospel is in their own hearts.
Yes.
It just strengthens what they believe as they share it with others. And I mean, it's not a cure-all. In other words, if you have a young person that goes and evangelizes and shares the gospel, is that going to assure us or assure them that they're going to, be fruitful as they move on in their lives and become adults? No, but I think it can go a long way to help establishing them in their faith.
I also think that when you take young people soul winning and adults go with them, they also are more prone to soul win young people. Young people are more prone to look for a young person than even an adult would look for a young person. So you feed that. And if you're listening to this program, that's a great opportunity in your church. You can take an evening or an afternoon with young people and go soul winning to reach young people, because a young person is more inclined to respond to a young person to come to church or to get saved, because you're right where I'm at. Everything I'm going to say to you, you can identify one-to-one. And Pastor Paul and Kimmy, I think you guys would agree with that. That's a great way to reach young people.
Yeah, I think that's really a key part of both the youth ministry inside the church and the youth ministry outside the church. We've done this before where we've asked the teens or junior teens and asked them, how do you know somebody that is unsaved in your life? And are you willing to go and talk to that person who is unsaved? And goes along with what Pastor Love said. It kind of reaffirms and makes them think about what they believe and why they believe what they believe. When you're explaining it to somebody else, it just makes it more real in your own heart. And like you were saying, Pastor Ronaldo, it is they're all on the same level, which is the thing that we are trying to do, as youth ministry people. I'm trying to get on their level and understand their reality and understand what they're going through and what they're thinking about. And the kids, the teenagers are already at that point. So they don't have to go down to that level. They can just talk to one another and explain, I went through these same issues and had these same questions, and now I have answers for them. And, you can have those same answers. And I think that that's important for us to kind of relay to our young people. You have people in your life that are not saved or don't know about Jesus, and why aren't they, and how can we kind of convince them or talk to them about Christ and have their lives changed? One thing I was thinking about as we were talking about this, Jesus was really adamant, or it was important to him for children to be taught correctly. In Matthew 18, verse verse 5 is whoever receives one little child like this, he has a child with him, he says, in my name receives me. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it will be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. How important was that for Jesus that young people were trained and understood and were taught and not caused to sin? That's what we're doing. It's better for me to have a millstone and have me drown in the sea than to try to teach young people sin instead of teaching them the love of God. And I think that's what we're called to do. And that's how serious it is for us. Like, am I causing them to sin, or am I leading them to God in my example and in my teaching and in my interactions with them?
Wow.
That's part of the biggest challenge today for young people. It's because, remember, when we were growing up, we knew the difference between right and wrong. We knew what sin was because people were talking about it. But now, in an age where absolutes have virtually disappeared, they don't even think anything is sin, right? I mean, we've often said it, but the only place you ever hear about or read about sin is on a menu in a restaurant when you get to the dessert section, right? Sin cake, sinful Sunday. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with, if you're born a young boy that thinking you're a girl or vice versa. That's not sin. There's no sin anymore. So that's a pretty big challenge for this particular generation because they don't even see the need to be saved in the first place. But to go back what Pastor Paul said, what a good question to ask young people. Do you know any unsaved people? And most of the time, their answer is no. I'm in the church. All my friends are saved. I would say, get to know some unsaved people. I don't mean hang out with them so that their influence influences you. Hang out with them so that your influence in Christ influences them. In other words, we teach our young people the only reason why you should be around an unsaved young person is to lead them to Christ. And the only reason why you're around other believers is to build each other up and to fellowship with each other.
There is a move. This is part of the good news of the remnant of God. And even in light of all of this, God always has a remnant. There is a move among young people, probably greater than in the last 50 years, towards apologetics. A lot of young people are starting to get their hands into apologetic positions and thinking so that they can win their world. They actually have a lot of questions, and apologetics opens a door for them. So I'm wondering, in a missionary opportunity, if having a youth apologetics class, okay, how to win my world, how do I share my faith, how do I answer questions? I'm 12, I'm 11, I'm 14, I'm 16, I'm 10. How do I win my world? I love that idea. I get more apologetic questions these days from young people than I do from adults. Well, what does this mean? And why does it say that? And how do I answer that question? They want to know. So I think God can use that and turn them into mini evangelists, win their world. I mean, I can win my world. I can instead of, like Pastor Love said, get to know the guy at the gas station or the guy around the corner or the lady that sells whatever, and I can share my faith and I can have a confidence because I know what I believe in. I know Pastor Gary did this Summer Live program. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that. You have an amazing vision to reach young people in Baltimore this year. And I like the way you took an entire chunk of time and said, okay, we're going after young people. That is the goal. Everything else is going to be secondary. They're going to get Christ. We're going to invest in them. We're going to meet them where they're at in a multiplicity of different things. But the goal is them and the goal is Christ. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah. One of the first visions really is it's an in-reach for the church because one of the greatest places to develop evangelists is to have a child respond to your message, and it's an easy place. We want to create an atmosphere where it's an easy place for people to share their faith and to see a child respond to the gospel and to see joy brought on some kid's face because we have an atmosphere of love, and a kid is going to have a sense of security around him. Like these are our goals, and as we go out as a team, we have this desire to love one another first. That we are a team that goes out and loves people, and then our secondary, because what good is the team if it goes out and it doesn't love each other in the church, and it's just out there to do something amongst kids? We want our love to speak to these kids, to show them that we are disciples. And so that's one of the first goals that we actually have. And then we have this you could say this atmosphere of love, and we see God work miracles inside of this unity. We see where God commands a blessing. So that's really the foundation of this, of Summer Alive. We're asking God to command a blessing where we are, and we're believing that. Where did I learned how to act? The first person I spoke to about the gospel was the kid that Andy Velitis said, take him to the side and give him a message because he's uncontrollable, in the class. And that was the first message I ever gave, and it was about the green grass and the mercy of God. But so the children create an opportunity also to give people a ministry in the church. That's what Paul Angelonis, Pastor Paul, that's what you're doing. God's creating a capacity in your life as you minister to kids, for greater things. It's like, this is part of children's ministry. So, and then children's ministry is also a tool to reach the entire family, to reach the entire community. They're going to see us out there, and we're just believing God is going to open doors. Pastor Love, traveling through an airport and going to places, the doors that, I'm sure God has opened because you were with a bunch of teens. You have numerous occasions where that actually happens. So it's also, as you go with them, it creates opportunities.
That's great. Any closing thoughts, Pastor Paul, Kimmy? If you were talking to, say, a missionary pastor or youth pastor overseas or even here about reaching the young, any closing thoughts for them?
I would just say, go where you are. You don't have to go somewhere. You don't have to. Events are great. Of course, you want to draw people to the church. But we recently just moved, and our kids have an opportunity to have a lot of neighborhood friends where they've never actually had that before. And we're teaching our kids to know the difference between, wow, I see that they don't have Jesus as a reference in their lives. And it's okay, because I can show them that I have Jesus as a reference in my life, and they can see I speak differently, I think differently, I act differently. You don't have to necessarily shove it down their throat and get in their face about it at first. But you can live your life, and you can play basketball with your neighbor friend. So out on the mission field, you can be friends with your neighbor's children. You can draw in the everyday things that you do, and then eventually draw them.
Beautiful. Pastor Gary, any closing words for a pastor or a youth pastor listening about reaching young people?
Give you an example. Kids, I lived on the ground level of an apartment building, and kids were like knocking on my windows, and the snow was melting outside. I ran outside. I chased them down. I threw one kid in the snow. I told him never to do it again. And I said, and then I welcomed them into my house. And we had popcorn together. I gave them the gospel, and one kid actually got saved. His name is Johannes. Okay. But just one thing I want to say about this, it's like when you love a child and you want to give them the gospel, like you can be, like we learned yesterday, you can be angry. You can give them tough love. And it's like, it's not a sentimental love. And you don't have to be overrun by a child, but you have this vision for this child. And you have this multifaceted ministry for a child. It's not just like, you can do whatever you want to me because I'm trying to reach you. You get to show God's nature to this child as God leads you. So I'm just saying this ministry, you have to be a listener to God when you minister to children.
That's excellent. Pastor Leffy, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I love that, what Pastor Gary just shared. You can be tough. Sometimes you have to be. We finished the convention here, and I saw one of the young people that came from another state to come to convention, and the first young person's, the teen meeting that we had, he didn't show up. I saw him afterwards later that night. I said, "What happened to you? Where were you?" He says, "Oh, I couldn't find it." Even though there are huge signs everywhere, like neon signs saying, "Teens, this direction, come down here." I mean, we know, okay, that was just a lame excuse. But I said, well, the next meeting, you got to be there. I said, because you didn't just come here to go to Hershey Park. You didn't just come here to go swimming at a swim club. You came here because this is the International Convention. You came here to hear from God. Well, the next meeting, he showed up. And I got a text from him late last night, and he said, thank you. That message in that meeting touched my heart deeply.
Amen.
You know, and I wasn't, you know, it wasn't sweet like, hey, oh, we missed you at the meeting. I said, you're here to come and to be with us and to hear from God. Make sure you're there. It was kind of tough. I didn't even know how he would respond to it, but he responded beautifully to it. So again, the same way God's dealt with us, he loves us just the way we are, but he loves us so much, he doesn't intend to leave us that way. So again, we love them right where they're at, but we love them so much, we know that God's love has the power to change them.
That's awesome. And let's rehearse a little bit. We talked about personal investment, one way to reach the young. We talked about relational connection. We talked about something as simple as remembering people's names. We spoke about visitation, going to visit them. And maybe in the culture where you're serving God, that might be unusual. But you can be creative in how you initiate a visitation. You can say, I'm here to visit the family, not just to visit the young Kai. But then mix that in. How are you, Mom? How are you, Dad? And where are your children at? We'd like to see them too, the whole family. So finding ways to get around the cultural barriers for visitation. We talked about outings like Pastor Gary had a Germany Camp Life. I would love to hear the details of Pastor Gary's camp life in Germany. I'm sure that...
Well, he said that they climb trees.
They climb trees. Well, he just threw a kid in the snow, so there you go.
There you go.
So I definitely want to see that. I want receipts on that, Pastor Gary, about the German camp life. We also mentioned about just the juxtaposition of trying to reach the lost outside of our church that are young and ministering and building the ones that are in our church and kind of holding their hand and walking to them relationally through the transitions in the church, knowing that we're going to lose them. But as Pastor Gary said, we're sowing seeds of life. We're sowing seeds of a relationship with Christ that will carry them for the rest of their life. Because it's a stark reality that maybe half of the kids that come through your specific transition, you might not see them again. That's a real reality. But like he said, you put Christ in, teach a child and train a child in the way they should go, and it will never depart. It does return. It doesn't return void. It does come back. So we have a vision for reaching our young people. It's the world. You can't ignore it. And after all, that's the future of the church. If you have no ministry to reach the young, you pretty much have decided this is the church that's going to be the way it is for the rest of eternity. And this church is getting older, and young people are getting older. And as you said, we're growing up, and in some cases growing out. And we'd like them to grow out with Christ. So let's continue to pray for our young people and the mission that's for the entire world, not just for the adults and not just for the husbands and the wives, but for young people. And pray for this summer. This is a great opportunity, a lot of great weather, at least in our part of the world, a lot of opportunity to help them. If it's not great weather and if it's 10 feet of snow in your place, Pastor Gary's got a ministry for you. I'll give you the German plan to reach out for that. So anyway, God bless you and thank you so much. We'll see you next week on Missions Monday.